Hi, I'm Ossie and I'm back with ALO Audio's Andromedas. Now, if you haven't already, check out my unboxing video of them as I cover stuff like, what's in the box, all the tips and other bits and pieces and what have you. And today I'm just going to focus on the ergonomics and the sound, essentially. Now, if you weren't already aware, I originally heard the Campfire audio IEMs at one of the Tokyo Headphone Festivals. I had to listen to the Jupiters and I found them a bit too V-shaped for my liking, a bit too bright in the treble, and not enough mid presence. So I was very pleased when I listened to the Andromedas for the first time, as the overall clarity and the coherence and the balance of the sound was really fantastic. So I asked Ken, can I take a pair home to do a video on, and this is where we are now. Now, since then, there have been some changes, not many, but a little bit since I originally unboxed them. Now, the design, of course, they're metal IEMs, which is kind of unusual, although not so much now that other makers are reducing metal body universal IEMs. They use a Shure type connector, and in this case of the Campfire audio ones, they use a higher quality one than normal, which is a little bit stiffer, and you have to give them a good pull to remove them, which is intended that they'll be long lasting and not become loose and unusable over time, though you wouldn't want to plug and unplug them much. Now, a significant aspect of that is that ALO Audio, of course, started originally making cables, and that's where their business began, long before they made IEMs. And so a problem I've had way back when I bought, say, Ultimate's TF10s, is that the cable they came with was kind of poor quality. I don't know if it was tin, copper, or what have you, but it ended up turning green and corroding, and the result was the sound became harsh and unpleasant. And I took a chance on buying an aftermarket cable, and it turned out to fix up the problem. And I've had a similar thing with my JH Audio JH13s, as the cable became green. I bought this some years back. I don't think it's a current issue now, but they had one of those cheap cables as well. They turned green, and the sound became harsh. I plug in an aftermarket cable, and they sound good again. So a problem that they've had even with high-end IEMs is that the cable quality has been an issue. No such problem with the ALO Audio cable. Now, it looks like a regular floppy, regular IEM cable. It doesn't look like anything special, but actually it uses LITS wire. So this high quality LITS wire should last you a long time, and that's going to be good. So you don't need to unplug and plug these connectors much, and they should hopefully likewise last you a long time. And it's something that a lot of people who buy high-end IEMs do. They buy a high-end pair and then they buy a high-end aftermarket cable. No such necessity here, I reckon. So that all being said, the next thing on the list is the ergonomics. Now, since, as I was saying, there have been some changes made, some people were concerned that the kind of jagged edges here would be a little bit uncomfortable. I haven't had any problem myself, but I have very kind of average ears, so your mileage may vary. However, ALO Audio and the latest versions that people have received have cut some chamfers on here to make them a little bit smoother and more rounded. And so when you get a pair, you'll notice they'll be very slightly different to what you're seeing in this video here, and that should make them a little bit more comfortable. Again, I didn't have any issues, but you never know. Someone with maybe smaller ears might. Now, a little ergonomic thing that I forgot to mention before, there is a choker nicely built into the cable as well, and not being a smartphone cable, you can easily have a choker on there which can hold them in place nicely, as the cable itself comes with memory wire. Now, there are people have different opinions about what's good and bad. Some people don't like memory wire at all. So I don't know how readily that could be removed. I haven't tried. I suppose you could cut open the outside plastic and pull the memory wire out. Or I don't know if ALO Audio will ever make a non-memory wire cable. Who knows? The other thing is, of course, with these connectors, they swivel indefinitely. They swivel in 360 degrees, so that if you're one of those people like me used to lining up your IEMs by telling where the curve of the memory wire is, you might find that very annoying when you find them both kind of backwards. So some people find that, as I said, a real pain in the rear. So if you're one of those people, you may want to consider a different cable in that case. But otherwise, that's the only problems I found with their ergonomics as such. Now, the next part is the tips. Now, the stock tips, which I actually don't have on them at this very moment, I have in the bag here. They're fairly wide bore tips. Now, the tips attach, of course, right here on, they snap on, much the same as you get with other high-end IEMs, and I have, for example, a pair of, unfortunately, completely different color, Dita Audio IEMs. Now, you'll see that they too have take snap-on tips, and but the bore, the nozzle of the Andromedas is very slightly bigger and if you're not watching this on full resolution, you may have a little bit of trouble seeing it. It's probably going to be, I still should be able to show it if I line them up side by side. You can see that the ALO Andromeda end is somewhat a little bit bigger, but still I had no trouble snapping tips onto them. For example, I put spin fits on them with absolutely no difficulty. The only problem is that spin fits, to allow that neat little spinning effect, to allow them to rotate easily, that requires a slight bore restriction in the middle. And if you can see down the center here, you can't quite see the exit holes of the drivers. Now that resulted in somewhat of a sound change, and it can be luck of the draw. If I can get them on there because they're more comfortable, then I like to use them. But in this case, they changed the sound for the worse for me. Although other people have put them on and had no issues with the sound changes, I think they lost the best aspects of the sound in doing so. Another tip I tried, which is what I have on at the moment, is the Jvc Spiral Dots. And I mentioned these before in other videos. They have on the inside a series of dots in the tube part in a spiral shape, and those dots reduce turbulence inside of in this part. And they improve the overall coherency of the IEMs, and the downside is that because they're very wide bore, even wider bore than the stock tips, or in a way, they can make IEMs brighter. And if the stock tips have a narrower bore, that can be for the worse as well, even if they do make the overall sound more coherent. Now, in the case of the Andromedas, they definitely cleared things up. Maybe they brought out the treble very slightly more, and that's probably really worth getting into types of genres. If you listen to mostly acoustic music, especially something like classical, where you want a kind of wide and spacious sound, these, especially with these tips, the overall Andromedas, or even with the stock tips, really nail it in that regard. They do have a kind of very spacious sound, as much as you can reasonably get with a pair of IEMs, considering your ear pinner is not involved when listening. And the treble comes out nicely without coming out too bright, and the bass comes out maybe not as well as a dynamic driver can deliver bass, but with enough punch, and that I tend to liken the overall sound to being something like an in-ear monitor version of, say, Mr. Speaker's ethers or ether flows, in that they have overall amount of balance, but a little bit of mid-bass emphasis, which can be good or bad depending on the type of music. So with some types of music, I found, especially with these tips, they could be a tiny bit too bright. An example might be, say, Gorillaz' Demon Days, which has a very bright component to some of the songs, and they could be very slightly on the irritating side, but not too much. With the stock tips, I find them no problem at all. A universal bonus in that regard is that they come with Comply foam tips, which is best if you want isolation. And although I find them a little bit too stiff for comfort for my preferences, with some IEMs, as you may have seen in my other videos, they can tend to interfere with the sound and degrade it or make it too bright or too dull or what have you. In this case, they don't seem to affect the sound in any significant degree, and if you're looking for a more isolating pair of high-end IEMs and you don't mind using the Complies, these could be the go. So definitely good luck with the Comply tips in that regard, and that makes them good for me for use on public transport. So that's the situation where it is with tips. And coming back to music is where things got a little bit more interesting. Plugging them into various DAPs. I have a variety of DAPs floating around here. Some of them, like my iPhone, have a slightly high output impedance. I mean, ideally the output impedance for DAP should be close to 0. And I have plenty of DAPs here. I have, the good old X7, which I'm going to do a review on soon. And I have a loaner AK380. And with these DAPs, they sound pretty much the same, although thankfully the ALO Audio brought out its high-end. It certainly fits into the high-end in that I could easily make out the greater detail out of, say, the AK380 versus listening with the X7. Now, in that, when I was listening with something like my iPhone or the SoundAware M1, it caused the high output impedance caused somewhat of a bass drop-off. Now, that could be good or bad. With some music, like I like listening to the Verve remixed tracks where they take old blues tracks, say from Nina Simone and Ella Fitzgerald, and have DJs remix them, they were mastered a bit too bass light. And in that make the Andromedas end up being too thin sounding for that kind of genre. For those I like the other very much more bassy IEMs, and that's more a mastering issue than anything. However, with acoustic music, sometimes they can sound a little bit too thick in the mid bass, and having that higher output impedance and reduced mid bass could end up kind of balancing things out really nicely with them. So in that, again, they're more like a pair of in-ear monitor planers in a sense, in that they can sometimes sound too good and bad depending on the kind of music you're listening to. But overall, I think if you have a balance, if you're like me and you have a kind of a balance towards listening to acoustic music, like a good old Friday night in San Francisco, like I'm playing on my AK380 at the moment, then you'll find the ALO audios are absolutely fantastic. I compared them to I have a pair of JH Audio Laylas, the original ones, not the latest, which have Moon Audio Silver Dragon on at the moment, and these are. I actually expected the ALO audios to sound brighter than the Laylas, which tend to sound very dark to me. Now, it turned out to be a tip problem more than anything. They actually ended up sounding, when I A/B'd them, sounding very similar. I think it's all down, again, to the tips. Now, the Laylas have slide-on tips. They have this tube which everything slides onto, and depending how far you slide them on, you either get some tube left, or if you push them on really far, you get almost no tube left, which means they go fairly deep into your ear canal. Whereas the ALO audios, being a sort of more kind of pill shape and of a short extension for the tip, don't go so far. And I think that's where I had issues with the sound and the overall bass extension, which of course again can be adjusted with the Laylas. So you get some mileage may vary there. But for whatever reason, even though I did find fairly similar results to the sound, I found that I liked the Andromedas better. However, that being said, there is a reason these are 12 driver IEMs and have a 4th order crossover. Those extra IEMs for 4 drivers for the treble, 4 for the mids, and 4 for the bass are intended to give plenty of headroom to the sound for people, like I guess a lot of Jerry's customers are rock musicians and they rock out really hard to music, and having the extra headroom without distortion is very critical for those kinds of people. I listen at moderate levels, so the ALO audio Andromedas turned out to be fine for me for general listening. So in the end, the Andromedas have become pretty much my favorite pair of IEMs for all-round listening. They have such an open and clear and balanced sound that I've always enjoyed plugging them in, even though I do have a high-end system to listen with. So that's my opinion of the ALO Audio's Andromedas. I think a big win for Ken on this one. They've been a fantastic effort for all the efforts he's made to get these designed and produced, and his careful hand selection of the assembled IEMs to make sure you only get the best ones with no faults whatsoever. I think he's getting a complete win in that regard. So that's the ALO Audio Andromedas, and if you have any questions, please ask in the comments field and I'll do my best to answer. And if you did like the video, give it a thumbs up. Also, if you want to see more, please do subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you online.